picked? The question is why the cities picked. Well, the reason is that by the time that they were getting ready to identify target cities, most of the big Japanese cities were already bombed. Tokyo would have been a useless target because Tokyo was already pretty much burnt down. So they need to have cities that hadn't been bombed. And so it's going to be a medium-sized city. Plus they want cities that have some kind of military installation. Okay. So Kokura was an arsenal. It made weapons. Nagasaki was a naval base. Hiroshima was an army base, a central command for the army base. So it has to be a city that hadn't been already burned down. It has to have military, and it needs to be as large as it can. So those four cities were the remaining cities that were identified. The story is that the city of Kyoto was also identified as on the target list, but Secretary Stimson was insisted that he thought Kyoto was the cultural and heritage center for Japan, and he didn't want Kyoto to be burned down. So he kept taking it off the list. The Air Force kept putting Kyoto on the list, and he kept striking it out. So when all said and done, those are the four cities that were identified as targets. Okay, so August 6th for Hiroshima, August 9th for Nagasaki. Every year on August 9th, there's a day of remembrance at the city of Kokura. And that's because the citizens of that city knew that their city was a target for the atomic attack. And it's just circumstances that says that their sister city of Nagasaki was hit rather than the city of Kokura. Okay, so that ends the story. We're not going to talk about any more bombing. We're going to end the tour. I think we have 10 minutes. We'll talk about the Concorde. So if we turn around here, we'll go visit the Concorde. Okay, so let's start the story about the Concorde. Behind me, this beautiful white airplane here is the Concorde. It's a supersonic jetliner that ordinary people like us, we have the money, can fly supersonic. Okay, where does the Concorde come from? Back to World War II. One of the stories about this museum is it documents a huge advances in technology. The Wright brothers in 1903 was barely able to get off the ground, fly a very short distance, but that was the so-called first man-power flight. In the span of 66 years, Neil Armstrong was able to set foot on the moon. Pretty amazing stuff. 250,000 miles to the moon, land there, and put a footprint on there. How does all that happen in 66 years? Unfortunately, a lot of this pace of technological development happened because of wars. The Wright brothers, they did their thing, and they went along slowly, and accelerated development because of World War I. And then World War I was over, and then World War II happened about 30 years later, and accelerated development again. In the span of 20 years from World War I, the airplane had gone from barely able to get off the ground to the ultimate in development for propeller airplanes. At the end of World War II, propeller airplanes were obsolete, and jet airplanes were starting to fly at the end of World War II. Of course, things didn't end in World War II. Then we had the Korean War and the Cold War, the space race. So all these technological developments happened because of war pressures. Now, this thing has nothing to do with wars, but it was swept up by the same kind of challenges that happened after World War II. And that is that Great Britain and France were first world nations before World War II. After World War II, they were no longer the superpowers, but they still have claims to first world nation status. And so they have to invest to maintain that status. And one of the things that they have to invest is to show technological superiority. And they decide that where they want to go is to challenge in the building of a supersonic jetliner, what's called the SST, supersonic transport. In this contest, there were 4 countries involved: Great Britain, France, United States, and the Soviet Union, of course. Okay, so let's talk about Concorde. It turns out that neither France nor Great Britain had the financial resources to develop a supersonic jetliner. World War II has drained their treasury and they were destituted. And so what they decided to do is that we can't go alone, we'll combine forces, join forces. And this joint venture is called Concorde. That joint venture also gave the airplane its name, the Concorde. Initially, the Concorde also tried to get the United States in, so it will be a Western democracy versus East, the Soviet Union contest. But the Americans are saying, we're Americans, we don't need you guys. So America will go alone against Concorde, against the Soviets. Okay, so America actually eventually gave up. There were 2 reasons they gave up. One reason was that there were many people in the United States that didn't think that supersonic transports was viable. One of the reasons they don't think it's viable is because supersonic airplanes generate an explosive noise called a sonic boom. An airplane flying through the air at supersonic speeds, faster than sound, will create tremendous shock waves that generates massive noise on the ground as it flies over. So the thought was a jetliner has to be near a big city, and all that noise around a city will become unacceptable. So therefore, it's not going to be a success. Well, to test out this theory, the Air Force was asked to fly supersonic jet bombers over to Oklahoma City on a pattern just like a jetliner. So the question is, will people notice? So what do you think? When they did the experiment, this happened in the mid-1960s. Did they notice that explosive noise going over Oklahoma City? No? Yes, they did. They heard it. But the key question is, did it bother them? No. Most people know, because most people hear the supersonic boom like a distant thunder, except for those people that are directly under the path of the airplane. People directly under the path of the airplane will have an explosive noise that really could be destructive. It could shatter windows, it could knock things off your shelf, and it could do damage. So those people that are directly under the path says, no way, no how, no supersonic flight. And it turns out they were right. That when the Concorde became operational in the mid-1970s, every country that could take a Concorde as part of its regular plan passed law that said no supersonic flight over land. Well, that's going to be a major problem for Concorde later. Okay, so that's one problem. The second problem was that it demanded a lot of money to build a supersonic airplane. And the United States Congress was simply not going to allocate the money. Because in the 1960s, what was going on? We had the space race. We were paying billions and billions of dollars to go to the moon. We had a war in Vietnam. We were paying billions and billions of dollars and lives fighting in Southeast Asia. And President Lyndon Johnson had plans and ambition for a lot of social programs. We simply cannot pay for all this stuff. And supersonic transport was a nice concept, but it didn't create any new technological development for the United States. The military already does it. So he said, we're not going to do it. It's not of a national priority. Whereas in Great Britain and France, it is a national priority. Remember, they want to be claimed to be the first world nation. So they have to be first in something. So they continue with the supersonic transport. And of course, when they developed it, it turns out in the 1970s, when it became operational, sure enough, they couldn't fly everywhere they want. Well, that becomes a serious problem for the Concorde, because if you can't fly everywhere you want, your market's going to be very limited. Okay, so hold that thought. Let's talk about the Concorde that we see here. Beautiful airplane. It flies at twice the speed of sound, which means about 1,400 miles per hour. Very fast. On a commercial jet from London to New York, it takes about, I think it's about 7.5 hours. The Concorde can do that in about 3.5 hours. Pretty darn amazing. Why not faster? It's a later technology. The Blackbird can fly 3 times the speed of sound. Why just limit it to 2? Well, the answer is quite simple. At Mach 2 speed, the air friction on this airplane will heat the airplane outside skin up to a range of about 250 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, you can just make the airplane out of aluminum. Higher than that, you need to go to titanium. I think the Air Force has already grabbed all the titanium there is to build a Blackbird. So you're not going to build this airplane in titanium. So the Concorde is limited to Mach 2 flight. But Mach 2 flight is still very, very fast. Now, there are other things about Mach 2 flight that you need besides just the right shape. Look at the wings. This is what's called a delta wing. A delta wing is triangular shape because the Greek capital letter delta is a triangle. So a delta wing is exceptionally good for high-speed flight. I didn't point it out before, but the wing on the shuttle is a delta wing, and the wing on the Blackbird is a delta wing. So a delta wing is exceptionally for high-speed flight. But there is one problem with the delta wing, and that is this. It may be good for high-speed flight, but it's not very good for low-speed flight. Okay, what am I talking about? Okay, when the Concorde is flying fast, it's flying flat like this. As it slows down, the delta wing causes the Concorde nose to come up. As it flies slower and slower, the higher up the nose goes. What's wrong with this?
Can't see the ground.
Can't see the ground. By the way, when does the Concorde fly at slow speed?
It's landing.
Takeoffs and landings. You can't land at 1,400 miles per hour. That's a crash. You got to slow down. So as you go like this, the pilot can't see the runway. So what do? Well, the engineers for Concorde says, well, we'll solve that problem. And they solve the problem this way. The airplane's nose detaches and bends downward on takeoffs and landings. Okay, like a giant stork. The wing is out, the head is up, the beak is down. So that's what it looks like on takeoffs and landing because of the delta wing. The other thing you need to fly really fast is that you need a very slender fuselage. Okay, you cannot make a wide-body 747 go supersonic. There's no engine big enough to do that. So you have to have a very narrow fuselage. You look right here, you can see the slender fuselage. This is what makes it look elegant. This is what enables to fly twice the speed of sound. Now the problem with a very slender fuselage is that while the outside enables you to fly really fast, the inside doesn't give you much room for passengers. Here's what the Concorde looks like inside. Okay, 4 seats. 2 by the window, the aisle, and then 2 more seats. Very narrow. Now, by the way, these are not even first class seats. They're just pretty ordinary seats. Doesn't have the room. And the aisle is so narrow, I'm not sure if there's room to drag a screaming customer from the back of the airplane to the front of the airplane. Okay, so 4 across on an airplane this big, you can barely carry 100 passengers. Okay, that's a problem because 100 passengers means there are not that many paying customers. So the ticket for a Concorde becomes very expensive. And what are we doing nowadays? We want cheaper and cheaper seats, not expensive. Lastly, the Concorde, to fly Mach 2, has these big jet engines over here. These big jet engines consume a lot of fuel, much like you saw on the Blackbird. Lots and lots of fuel burn. And if the fuel is expensive, you got a problem. Well, the Concorde was designed in the 1960s when oil prices were very low, but something happened in October 1973. Remember what happened? The October War. The prices went up. OPEC finally got its legging. Oil prices went up. Jet fuel prices went up. So these engines burn a lot of jet fuel. So the operating cost for a Concorde got very expensive. So once again, more expenses to be paid out by 100 paying passengers. Before you know it, the cost for a ticket on Concorde flying to Europe costs $10,000 round trip. Now, if you're rich, you don't care. But most ordinary people say, I don't pay that. I'll fly on a cram jet. So that was the problem with the Concorde. It got to be so expensive. The one thing that it needs to be succeeded on, it did, and that was make money for the airlines. Okay, so what is it? So the idea was that the development cost by the government was transferred to the taxpayers, and the airplanes was transferred to Air France and British Airways at basically nothing. They got it free. The idea was as they go commercial and they start flying hundreds of these airplanes, they'll return lots of money to the Treasury to pay for the development cost of these airplanes. So how much money did they actually return? None. None. Yeah, none. And instead of hundreds of Concordes being built, only 20 were built. And of those 20, 14 went into commercial service. 6 of them were used for testing. Of the 14 that went into commercial service, 7 went with Air France and 7 went to British Airways. And that's it. So it was lucky the United States never got into it. Okay, so by happenstance. Okay, I'm running short of time, so let me just tell you one more thing about the Concorde. And that is, one thing I find very peculiar. Look at the fuselage of the airplane. Look at the windows on the Concorde. He knows how tiny that is. Any idea why it would be so small? And if you were building an airplane, you got $10,000 paying passenger. You think you build a big picture window so you can look down over the earth? What do you think?
Is it because of the pressure on the craft at that speed?
Yeah, but do you think it feels more pressure?
No, I think the airplane itself is going to be less structurally sound with glass instead of metal.
Okay.
And moving at Mach
The
speed.
answer is that
I'm guessing it might
they
be
think
loud?
They need it for structural strength. We need less windows. But actually, it does have something to do with pressure, but not because of structural strength. Let me show you a video, and that illustrates the problem that we're trying to solve. Oops, that's not it. A video that we're trying to solve with the Concorde, and why they close small windows. Okay, where is it? Wrong video. Here you go. Okay, sound up. Okay, here you go. I'm going to show you this video. You might recognize it.